Weapons have existed as long as humankind. For millennia, they have determined the destiny of generations. Weapons bring suffering and death. They show what humans can inflict upon other humans. But they're also intended to keep the peace and pave new ways for technology. When it comes to developing destructive weapons, the innovativeness of mankind seems to know no limits. Our international experts reveal the secrets of weapons technology. The tank, firepower and speed.
It's like a tight little oven.
The hand grenade turns trench warfare into a nightmare.
Pull the pin, and we're ready to go.
The first machine gun, the Maxim.
And changed the world of firearms and warfare forever.
Our first weapon shows how killing became a mechanized process during the 19th and 20th centuries. Firearms were introduced in the Middle Ages, and ever since the military has kept trying to shoot faster and more effectively. The more bullets that hit the enemy on the battlefield, the more likely you are to win. But there is one problem. Reloading the weapons is cumbersome. In 1866, Hiram Maxim, an American engineer, tries out a rifle. It is tedious to have to reload after every shot, and his shoulder aches from the hard recoil of the weapon. Maxim, who is actually an electrical engineering specialist, has an idea. Could the energy from the recoil be used to reload? In 1881, he travels to Europe, where supposedly a friend gave him a crucial piece of advice.
And his friend tells him, "Do you know how you could make some real money?" And Hiram Maxim says, "How?" And Maxim's friend says, "Invent a weapon system that will allow Europeans to kill each other faster." And unfortunately, Maxim takes this advice.
At that moment, Europe is at peace. But it seems like only a matter of time before the next great war breaks out. 3 years later, Maxim debuts his new weapon. As long as the trigger remains depressed, the Maxim gun fires without stopping, without almost any recoil, since that force is used for the reloading process. We want to test how this automatic weapon really works. Karen Machnow is a weapons expert from Phoenix, Arizona in the US. On the shooting range, she shows us an original Maxim gun in action.
This gun was also known as the Grim Reaper and the Devil's Paintbrush, and changed the world of firearms and warfare forever.
A special component of the weapon is the water-cooled barrel.
You've got the water jacket. We have an area that you could unscrew to put the water inside the gun. It held about 4 liters of water. When the barrel gets very hot, which it does with sustained fire, that water would boil, steam would come up, condense through the steam tube, and come out through the front part of the gun here where we have a hole. So this would keep the gun cool.
Karen wants to put the machine gun to the test, using a historical example from 1908. Her target, 10 paint cans. Can she hit them all in 10 seconds?
Okay, I'm ready to fire.
In just 10 seconds, Karen fired around 100 shots. But how does the weapon really work? The key principle behind the mechanism. The recoil slides a carriage which ejects the empty cartridge case downwards. while at the same time putting a new cartridge into position. As long as the barrel stays cool and the shooter keeps the trigger depressed, the former nuisance of the recoil now provides the momentum for automatic reloading. Hiram Maxim has created the first automatic machine gun. A cartridge belt with 250 rounds of ammunition is attached to the heavy weapon, and with belt changes, it is possible to shoot up to 600 shots per minute.
Another interesting component about the gun is that it had a rate of fire of about 892 meters per second. Quite a devastating weapon. Didn't involve a crank mechanism. It was fully automatic. And again, that's what makes this gun so completely devastating and so revolutionary and so far ahead of its time.
As an advertising demo, Maxim uses bullets to cut down a tree, as seen here in 1890, accompanied by Chinese emissaries. But is this photo evidence trustworthy? To check it out, we'll begin our next experiment. An assistant buries a tree trunk in the ground.
And I'm not sure how long it's going to take to actually cut this tree down. So let's see what happens.
Karen Mack now fires away at the tree trunk with the Maxim gun. The mechanism jams, something that happened in isolated instances in the past, and happens to the historical weapon even more now after 100 years of operation.
It's not going back. This is what happens with 100-year-old pieces of equipment. Right, but let's go and take a look at what it did do.
What kind of damage did the Maxim gun do to the tree trunk?
Well, if you come back here, it's actually pretty impressive. You can see just how much it's cleared out the back of the tree. But around here, there's still a ways to go. So had we been successful, this would have gone down, but old piece of equipment, unfortunately. Would have been fun to see this happen. Didn't work out this time.
Our conclusion: the Maxim gun would actually have been able to penetrate and destroy a tree trunk. And the weapon also convinces the British military.
So it took that kind of fire into new spaces, and it became a key tool in the late 19th century in the pacification of areas outside Western Europe.
Omdurman, Sudan, 1898. One of the first missions to use the Maxim gun in combat. Followers of the Islamic Mahdi movement rebel against Egyptian foreign rule. When they meet on the Nile, the Mahdists far outnumber the Egyptian British army. But the British also have 20 new Maxim machine guns. The bloody toll of the battle, 48 dead on the British-Egyptian side. And an estimated 10,000 Mahdi fighters are killed. In the summer of 1914, World War I breaks out. The machine gun gives those on the defensive front a huge advantage over their attackers during combat.
It is man-portable. If you separate the barrel and the firing mechanism from the mounting and the ammunition, you can carry it one man at a time.
The machine gun becomes standard issue equipment for every European army.
In the First World War, everybody has Maxim guns. The German, Russian, Austrian and British Maxim gun are all based on the same patents. They all look essentially the same. They all do the same job in the same way. And Hiram Maxim and his company got the patent for that, and they took royalties on every single one of them. So they made a fortune out of everybody else having Maxim guns.
With a machine gun, a single soldier can kill hundreds of the enemy with just one finger on the trigger. The new weapons of World War I also bring with them unimaginable psychological stress. What does it mean to constantly look death in the eye? And what is triggered by killing dozens or even hundreds of other men? In war, one question has always pushed man to his limits. If commanded, will I be capable of killing? Evolution has turned us into social beings with deep-rooted inhibitions when it comes to killing. And that's a problem for the military. Studies show that many soldiers are afraid to kill even when they themselves are in danger.
Many men go through battle without firing their weapons effectively, some without firing them at all. This has been the case for as long as men have had the choice of whether to fire their weapons or not. One soldier does not equal one result. You need to know the soldier before you know what he's going to do.
To tackle this issue, training for new recruits includes a strong psychological component. Repetitive drills are designed to overcome fears and inhibitions. Don't think about it, just shoot.
It's about immersing people within that training to respond automatically to a situation, to not have that hesitation, which is the frontal part of our brain, rationalizing, saying, this is not a good thing to do, I'm not supposed to be doing this. If you can make that automatic, if you make that almost an animal reaction, this occurs, I respond in this way.
But even when pulling the trigger becomes automatic, killing takes its toll on soldiers, including those apparently unharmed. In World War I, doctors diagnosed the symptoms of shell shock as a merely physical reaction to the noises of constant fire. At the time, it is thought that loud sounds trigger minor concussions. Today, it is clear that war can cause serious mental disorders. After the Second World War, an entire generation deals with the psychological consequences of their experiences.
After World War II, we had men who didn't know what was happening to them. They fell to pieces if they survived the war and came home. Their families suffered, their relationships suffered, their health suffered, and it was not recognized. And if they showed weakness, they were considered weak, so people kept it within themselves.
Over decades, research into the psychological effects of war is sorely neglected. Well-founded studies do not take place until the 1960s. In 1980, the medical diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder is finally added to textbooks.
Once post-traumatic stress disorder began being recognized, men would realize that it wasn't them being weak, it wasn't them having an adverse reaction that none of their colleagues had. It was a completely normal reaction to witnessing such traumatic events. And once that was recognized, and then therefore treatment could follow, we now have a situation where families understand what their husbands, sons, daughters now are going through and recognize that they need that help.
With the introduction of the machine gun, mechanized warfare and the fear of being killed reaches a new level. The weapon dramatically alters the psychology of war. Engineer Hiram Maxim's invention forever changes the way that the world fights. And it also paves the way for another modern weapon, the hand grenade. The introduction of new weapons technology frequently results in fatal errors and avoidable massacres, especially at the beginning of World War I.
When the First World War broke out in 1914, the great armies of Europe thought that they would maneuver in a classical form using cavalry and infantry. They would set up set-piece battles in which whole armies engaged on a broad front. It rapidly became clear that firepower, both artillery firepower, infantry firepower, and particularly the machine gun, made it impossible for men to operate as they had in even 50 years before.
Machine guns and improved artillery claim high losses on both sides. Attacks without cover ultimately end as a bloodbath. After the devastating Battle of the Marne, both sides start digging. By the end of November, a continuous line of trenches runs all the way from the North Sea to Switzerland. Mobile warfare has turned into trench warfare. But what is the best way to effectively attack the enemy's narrow and hard-to-see trenches and bunkers? Artillery becomes a key weapon. The only way to defeat an enemy down in a trench is with ballistic fire. On both sides, a dense row of guns is positioned far behind the trenches. William Mills, an engineer in Birmingham, develops a new weapon for the trench soldiers. In 1915, the Mills bomb makes its way onto European battlefields. Mills' invention is no new idea. In the 16th century, transporting cannons is a problem. The soldiers need a lightweight weapon that can wreak havoc without too much effort. And the hand grenade is born.
The shape of these very early grenades resembles a pomegranate, hence the name.
The round, hard-skinned and many-seeded fruit becomes the namesake for the new weapon in the 17th century. A hollow clay jar is filled with gunpowder and metal slivers. A fuse ignites the explosive, and the sharp metal and clay fragments make their destructive impact.
17th and 18th century armies had elite soldiers called grenadiers who were generally big, tall fellows who could throw a grenade a long way.
They also changed their uniforms. These typical pointed Prussian hats, the grenadier hats, were made to look like this because, of course, if you were wearing a two-pointed hat, it would be a lot more difficult for you to throw a grenade.
With their hand grenades, the grenadiers stand at the ready on the front lines. But the weapon also has its pitfalls.
The grenade had to be lit. If the fuse went too quickly, the grenade would blow up before it was thrown. If it got dropped or anything like that, things could go wrong. And of course, if it was raining, it probably wouldn't work. So it was a rather temperamental weapon.
During the American Civil War, the next generation of hand grenades reaches the battlefields. An invention from William Ketchum eliminates the need to manually ignite the weapon. The grenade only needs to hit the impact fuse in the nose of the weapon in order to explode.
If the bomb lands on its side and doesn't detonate, then it stays relatively safe for a period of time. So, of course, the opponent can then take the grenade and throw it back to where it came from.
The latest hand grenade in 1915 is supposed to solve this problem. With historian Stephen Bull, we take a closer look at William Mills' invention. It has considerable advantages over its predecessors. It does not need to be manually ignited, and there is no unreliable impact fuse. The grenade is constructed using a perforated cast iron shell and filled with explosives.
The hand grenade was an old idea, but it received a new lease of life in the trenches of the First World War. The effect of an explosion in a confined space could be devastating.
The functioning principle of the hand grenade is that in the middle there's a fuse connected to the explosive charge. If the safety pin is pulled and the lever is released, then the tension of the spring hits the striker to ignite the fuse. 7 seconds later, it explodes. Combining portability with destructiveness, the hand grenade becomes a standard weapon during World War I. On the fronts of Flanders and France, an ingenious trench system is developed. A support trench is dug behind the main trench, connected to another passage known as a communication trench. The enemy is anywhere from 30 to a few hundred meters away, and the soldiers call the area separating the two sides no man's land. Hand grenades that land in a trench are terrifying, but changes to trench construction alleviate their devastating effects.
If a trench is straight, then shrapnel can fly far in one direction and potentially hit soldiers. So they thought if they dug the trenches in a zigzag shape, there would always be a corner nearby where a soldier could hide. And then shrapnel would only fly to the next corner and get stuck in the wall, and hopefully it wouldn't hit anyone.
Soldiers that are hit by fragments of a hand grenade often suffer life-threatening injuries. An effective drug to prevent gangrene has not yet been invented.
One of the key problems in trench warfare is the secondary infection following wounds because of the contaminated and dangerous nature of the ground that you're fighting over.
Sludgy ground, overflowing latrines, unwashed bodies and decomposing corpses. Everyday life in the trenches is yet another burden for soldiers during the war.
They had to wear their clothes all the time, and worse still, they also had to keep their boots on. That meant that conditions were ideal for fungus to grow, and bacteria also grew. And the skin became really macerated and stayed moist and was quite fragile and very vulnerable.
The lack of hygiene makes it virtually impossible to treat hand grenade injuries in the trenches.
These fragments often had very small particles, so that meant even if you had a tiny wound, it could easily become inflamed because of unhygienic conditions. And if you didn't have the right medication, then you could go from barely having a wound at all to having a serious injury that gets infected. And the infection can then spread to lymph vessels, to blood vessels, and can even lead to blood poisoning.
If a shrapnel wound does heal, it's only a matter of time before the next attack. In 1917, the British Mills bomb goes into mass production. The Germans are also developing their own completely different hand grenade. While Mills grenades look like an egg, the German version is at the end of a wooden stick. And it functions differently. The British hand grenade is a fragmentation weapon, but the Germans have created an explosive weapon. With historian Stephen Bull, we want to explore the differences between these two types of grenade. The head of the stick grenade holds over 100 grams more explosive material than the egg version. The difference is the force of the explosion, not the radius of the projectile fragments, but it needs to have pinpoint accuracy. The German grenade's wooden stick is supposed to help with the aim.
So these are the two grenades that we'll be testing. They're both time-fused models. This one is the Soviet F1, a similar design to the Mills. This one is the German M24, Stiel hand grenade or stick grenade. Different philosophies, but is one better than the other? And why?
Which grenade will Stephen Bull be able to land closer to his target in just one throw? He tries out the Mills bomb first.
Quite small in the hand, like a large egg, really. Pull the pin, and we're ready to go.
The grenade lands about 5 meters from the target.
Not bad, a reasonable throw, but it's a little short of the target. The main effect from this, of course, would be the fragmentation.
Does throwing the stick grenade give a better result? It lands directly on our target.
So that was a good long throw, all the way to the target. It seems that that long stick gives you a bit of extra leverage for a long throw.
The explosion would have dangerous consequences for the enemy, but the sharp fragments of the egg hand grenade would also be devastating.
The M24 gave me a longer throw because its handle gave me greater leverage. But this was a weapon for blast, essentially a weapon for use in the open. The Soviet F1 is perhaps a little handier, but not quite such a long throw. Its main effect was fragmentation, and preferably in enclosed areas. So these are both good grenades, but they're designed for different purposes.
Both types of hand grenade make their mark in World War I. To a lesser extent, they continue to be used during World War II.
The Second World War is not such a great war for the hand grenade because wars tend to be now much more mobile, much more fluid. There are still trenches and bunkers to be cleared, but they're only part of, rather than the whole of the war.
During World War I, 300 million hand grenades are produced by the German side alone, followed by 70 million in World War II. But the repercussions of their use remain the same. Those who survive a shrapnel wound often must resort to amputation to avoid death by gangrene. For decades, researchers have sought in vain to find a cure for gangrene. In 1928, Scottish bacteriologist Alexander Fleming accidentally discovers that pathogens no longer multiply when in close vicinity to a mold fungus. Fleming, together with biochemist Ernst Chain and pathologist Howard Florey, over the ensuing years worked to finally develop the first antibiotic, penicillin. The active ingredient prevents growing bacteria from completing their cell walls, effectively stopping them from spreading. Testing proves that the new drug is effective, but the British government is not ready to start the costly production. After joining the war, the United States step in and start mass production in 1942.
The need for penicillin at the front led to it becoming a top priority for the pharmaceutical industry. And they actively pushed this research because it was also a huge market for them.
The antibiotic is America's second most important project after the atomic bomb. Large advertisements proclaim, "Thanks to penicillin, he will come home." The Germans and Russians don't have access to the drug yet, and as a result, high numbers of their men die from infection. A strategic advantage for the Allies.
People don't die of disease, they get killed in battle. Whether that's morally uplifting or morally bankrupt, I don't know, but it does change the way that wars look. Wars are now about men dying in battle, and that's slightly easier to sell because it's heroic to die in battle. It's not heroic to die of diphtheria.
After the war, the expensive research also benefits the civilian population, and the advancement soon reaches the entire world. It's one case in which progress is accelerated by war.
What we're looking at is advancing on twin tracks. We're finding new ways of killing people in confined spaces and giving them horrific injuries which may become contaminated. At the same time, we're finding ways of dealing with those contaminations and healing people.
And for all armies, the hand grenade continues to be standard issue equipment. After 1945, it is used in practically every armed conflict.
Continues to be a very useful means of doing a job that nothing else does. You have a system of fighting in which you're going into individual buildings and clearing individual rooms, and the hand grenade is still the weapon of choice to clear the room.
A hand grenade is also developed for police without the fatal fragments. With a loud bang, blinding light, and dense smoke, stun or smoke grenades are hurled at criminals and even demonstrators. Their use is controversial. A legendary version of the thrown weapon owes its name to Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov. During the Russo-Finnish War of 1939, Finnish soldiers used gas-filled bottles against their Soviet attackers, calling them Molotov cocktails, as an allusion to their opponent's propaganda.
The original hand grenade was a homemade bomb, and the Molotov cocktail is a later version of the homemade bomb. And it's a classic solution to the problem of resistance against armed force when you have no weapons. You have to make a weapon out of something that isn't a weapon. And throughout history, human ingenuity has resulted in the conversion of perfectly ordinary things into weapons in times of need.
Throwing something at the enemy, a reflex as old as mankind. The only thing that has changed is what we throw. In the trenches of World War I, the defensive side always has the advantage, and the result is years of bloodshed with barely any change to the lines of the front. But that will soon all change with the next great development in weapons technology, the tank. In ancient times and the Middle Ages, armor and speed already played a crucial role in weapons development. In examples such as a chariot of powerful battering rams that could be used to attack a fortress. But the problem is drive. In the second half of the 19th century, the invention of the combustion engine opens up completely new directions for military technology. In 1906, in Austria-Hungary, the first tank is introduced with a rotating turret intended for both attack and defense. But its four-wheel drive proves to be not a match for the battlefields.
The wheel only rests on one point, which is a good thing because that minimizes friction and allows you to drive over the road with as little resistance as possible. But if your car ever got stuck in the mud, then you know that this is also a disadvantage, because with low friction, it's much harder to get a grip.
A spark of inspiration comes from agriculture. At the beginning of the 20th century, tractors with rotating tracks arrive on the fields, a method that the military quickly puts to use for themselves.
Tanks were constructed with a wide track that was like a wide belt, and that made the surface contact area significantly larger, so you could get through mud and you could also drive over holes much more easily.
When World War I breaks out, Winston Churchill, the British Naval Secretary, advocates the construction of tanks. On September the 15th, 1916, they're ready. In northern France, during the Battle of the Somme, the first British tanks are put into action. The hulking beasts can only move at a walking pace. The Mark I weighs close to 28 tons. Depending on the design, its 8-man crew operates either 2 cannons or 4 to 6 machine guns. At full throttle, the 6-cylinder petrol engine manages a speed of just 6 kilometers per hour. 49 of the world's first battle tanks are supposed to be deployed in battle. But on the first mission, there's already problems.
It has a relatively low-powered gasoline engine which gives off fumes inside the vehicle. The machine itself is unbelievably unreliable, so less than half the vehicles are going to make it to the start line and actually get going on the day of battle. It really is only suitable for going a short distance at walking pace over to the enemy's trenches. That's all it's ever going to do.
The loud and massive vehicle still nevertheless terrifies the enemy.
German soldiers were absolutely flabbergasted by this mechanical thing crawling towards them, which seemed to be bulletproof. The first time you saw one, they were terrifying. The second time, they were frightening. And the third time, they were slightly predictable.
The armor itself isn't thick enough to provide too much protection against direct artillery fire. And the Germans quickly realized that if they moved close enough to the tanks, they could fire through the observation slits, and they could set the fuel tanks on fire.
The tank's debut isn't enough to decide the war, but it is a convincing idea. Now every army in the world wants tanks, even the Germans, who are forbidden to do so by the 1919 peace treaty. They proceed anyway, and before long, Hitler's German Wehrmacht is equipped with entire armies of tanks. September the 1st, 1939. German tanks invade Poland and World War II begins. And with it comes the era of the so-called Blitz Wars, during which tanks become a decisive weapon. With tank invasions, the Germans quickly conquer half of Europe. By the end of June in 1940, Hitler has conquered Paris. Just 20 years earlier, the French and the Germans had waged war in the trenches for years. Now the Western campaign takes only 6 weeks.
the enemy couldn't respond because every time they responded, the Germans had already moved. So slow, lumbering responses from the British and the French in particular meant that by the time they realized what had happened, it was over and they were already retreating.
1 year later, German troops invade the Soviet Union. Hitler believes that just like in the West, victory will be swift thanks to the lightning speed of his tank attacks. At first, it seems as if all is going according to plan. But Soviet leadership recovers from the initial shock. Their country is huge and a counterattack is already being prepared. And it comes in the form of groundbreaking weapons technology. Almost 6 meters long, 3 meters wide, and weighing 26 tons. With wide tracks that make the Soviet T-34 mobile even in difficult terrain. The 3-meter-long cannon provides firepower superior to the German models. And at full speed, the steel Colossus can travel up to 55 kilometers per hour. Weapons expert Stephen Bull wants to take a closer look at the T-34. In 1941, the efficiency of the armor took the Germans completely by surprise.
Around the front here, the armor was 45 millimeters thick. But because it was so well sloped, a shell had to pass through 60 millimeters of armor.
How does it feel to drive a T-34? With an experienced tank crew, Stephen tests it out on the terrain.
So the T-34 had a crew of 4 men. There goes the driver, and the gunner, the loader, and last but not least, the commander.
This post-war version of the T-34 is still completely road-ready. From the outside, the tank seems huge, but inside, space is actually limited.
It's like a tight little oven, a noisy, tight little oven. And the reason I'm wearing this is because I'm expecting that my skull will be banging against the inside of the armour any moment. In my left hand, I have the lanyard to pull the mechanism of the main gun, and there should be a machine gun over my left-hand shoulder.
Tasks inside the T-34 are clearly distributed. In real combat, everyone knows what they need to do.
You're now down in the forward gunner's seat, looking back up at me from the position next to the driver. Just below you is the escape hatch. So if it gets bad, you can drop out through the floor. Hopefully we won't need to do that.
Now it heads onto the terrain. Can the T-34 handle the course and overcome the obstacles? The commander supervises the exercise. No problem for a steel Colossus. In World War II, the Soviet Union manufactures more than 50,000 T-34 tanks, double the amount of every type of German tank put together. Hitler's Wehrmacht attempts to make up for what they lack in tank numbers through a technically superior model. In 1942, a new tank called Tiger goes into mass production. At 26 tons, the T-34 runs at a speed of more than 50 kilometers per hour and is extremely maneuverable. The Tiger is more than twice as heavy and can only go 30 kilometers per hour. But it comes with much stronger weaponry. In a one-on-one battle, this would have advantages. Summer 1943. The Germans prepare for a major attack on the front in Kursk, roughly 500 kilometers south of Moscow.
The Soviets get intelligence of this operation and prepare for it, and they use minefields, anti-tank traps, and a whole series of systems to channel the German attack into predefined killing grounds where they can mass their own tanks.
July the 12th, 1943, the climax of the Battle of Kursk. More than 7,000 tanks and 2 million soldiers take part in the biggest tank battle of World War II.
The German tanks have an advantage in long-range firepower. The Russians have an advantage in mobility and close quarters fighting. So they set up battles that suit their tanks rather than the German tanks.
It is Hitler's last great attempt to defeat the Soviet army in a pivotal battle.
The largest tank battle in history is over, and so is the German offensive against the Soviet Union. This is the last battle where the Germans attack. From now on, the Soviets will attack and the Germans will defend.
The era of victories won by tank attacks has ended. Constant improvements in anti-tank weapons and air attacks have turned the hunters into the hunted. The successes of the World War II tanks take these developments into account. T-84 Oplot, the latest generation of Russian tanks. Since 2009, they've been part of the Ukrainian Army's arsenal. On behalf of the Malyshev Weapons Factory, former military personnel carry out various tests at a training site in Kharkiv, eastern Ukraine.
So this is the Oplot, the latest successor to the T-84, and it's got some amazing features. It's got explosive reactive armour, and it's got a 125mm gun, a smoothbore that can actually fire missiles. But perhaps most amazingly, it's a flying tank. It moves at 70 kilometers an hour on the road.
Stephen Bull wants to test whether the 50-ton tank can really pull this off. A military truck goes full throttle over the terrain, but it soon becomes clear that the T-84 Oplot can not only catch up with the truck, it can also effortlessly pass it. With its wide tracks on uneven ground, the tank will always be superior to a wheeled vehicle. But how destructive is this kind of modern tank? Stephen Bull and our team are there for the tank's test. The front of the current conflict in eastern Ukraine is about 300 kilometers away.
So the guys have just bombed up the tank and they've put in 3 rounds, and these are 2-part rounds. The projectile is fin stabilized, and behind it is the main charge of explosive.
The target is a solid stone wall. The team also sets up explosive gasoline drums behind it. The T-84's gun aims to destroy the target from a distance of 1.6 kilometers. From a distance of 1,650 meters, the tank reliably hits its target.
Well, that was a gut-shaking shot. You could see the flash. I could certainly feel the pressure going through my head. And I'm glad they warned me to keep my mouth open, because otherwise I'm quite sure something would pop inside there. So this wreckage here is what's left of the target. And you can see it's still burning, so I'm not going to go any closer than this, because if that goes off, this could be pretty serious.
But how does the modern tank handle uneven terrain? Stephen Bull goes along for the ride. The obstacle, 2 car wrecks. The 51-ton T-84 slides effortlessly over the vehicles. In the next test, the tank faces a burning roadblock. The tank seems to make it through the flames without effort as well. But in reality, it can only withstand a strong fire for a short amount of time.
I won't be doing that again in a hurry. When you were inside, some of the smoke and a few of the embers were being sucked in through some of the filtration system, and I could feel it getting very smoky in there. And I'm very glad that he got the lid open when he did. It certainly wasn't pleasant.
A tank that protects against any circumstance is only an illusion. The crews are actually no safer than the infantry. Tanks are as powerful as their myth only when they are used against civilians, whether in 1953 in East Berlin, 1968 in Prague, or in other places where dictatorships take actions against their own people. Today, as a tool of suppression, tanks are still the ideal weapon.
It's a powerful mechanical beast which threatens your security. It also makes you look big and strong. You know, it's the war elephant of the modern world. They're symbols of power as well as being powerful.
On modern battlefields, airplanes and missiles determine the victor. During the Cold War, the average estimated survival time of a tank crew was only a few minutes. And the role of large and powerful military equipment as a deterring symbol has long since shifted to other types of weapons. In 2002, American weapons engineers developed what is known as the mother of all bombs, a 9-meter-long bomb with an explosive charge of 11 tons of TNT.
The idea is, of course, that nuclear weapons can do it bigger and better than anything conventional, but you're not allowed to use them without starting a world war. So let's build the biggest one we can, short of a nuclear weapon.
15 years after its development under President Trump, the mother of all bombs is used for the first time. On April 13, 2017, it hits the site of the terrorist militia of the Islamic State in Afghanistan. Every building within a 150-meter radius is destroyed. The impact of the attack's media message takes the foreground, but the actual military gain is controversial.
What does it add to the arsenal of the world? Very little. There is a sense in which military organizations competing with each other, that's not a competition with anybody else, that's internal, and that's about their share of the budget voted through in Washington. So having that bomb makes them look good in Washington, and I suspect that's largely what's behind this.
This rivalry also plays out internationally. Russia's military debuts a male counterpart, the father of all bombs. In 2007, Russian state television broadcasts an alleged test of the vacuum bomb. But in this case as well, the bomb has a greater symbolic use as a propaganda than as an actual military tool.
During the explosion, the oxygen in the air burns to create an immense vacuum, and the pressure in the surrounding area drops abruptly. So if I've already inhaled and the air in my lungs is at normal atmospheric pressure, then it suddenly expands and my lungs burst.
For thousands of years, arms races have been a dangerous aspect of war. And despite any assurances that new weapons are only intended to deter an opponent, they are often still used, unleashing their full power of destruction.